Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Alabaster Project. We are so excited to kick off season 2 of the podcast. And I am very pumped tonight because I have a special guest. Her name is Caitlyn. And Caitlyn is a wife, she's a business coach, an entrepreneur, a podcast host, and now she's officially an author. Caitlyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super honored to be here. When you reached out, I was super excited. One, that you were starting your podcast back up, because I really enjoyed listening to it before. But two, it's fun to be on the flip side of podcasts as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. So, one thing that I really admire about you is your entrepreneurial spirit. You are a go getter. I've just watched as you have just tackled things head on. And I really appreciate that about you. And just wanted to say that publicly. But to start season 2 of the podcast, one of the things that I am deciding to do is asking all of our guests a random question. And so, your random question for tonight is if you could only eat one brand of chicken nuggets for the rest of your life, which brand would you choose and why?
Oh, okay. This is a great question because I love chicken nuggets. But oh, Wendy's, does that count
Okay.
as a brand
It
of
does.
chicken?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
All right. What makes you go with Wendy's?
I do like the spicy ones from time to time, and, like, I am a very picky chicken person, and for some reason, like, Wendy's, even though it's fast food, I'm like, quality enough. So
I love it. That's awesome. Well, your book, More Than Conquering: A Season of Surrender, it is going to be released on September 3rd. Can you give us an overview of what this book is about?
yeah, so essentially, I cover and jump into several topics that I feel that women more specifically struggle with. I know several people of them, several humans struggle with these things, but women more so just in terms of like joy, comparison, insecurity, doubt, fear. And I talk about just by surrendering those over to God and leaning on Him, we can start to conquer them. Whether it's dealing with doubt and fear, just surrendering over our lives and our ability to trust in the Lord and with His help, then conquer things, as an example.
That's incredible. So what inspired you to put this all together in a book form to share with the world?
Yeah. During COVID is kind of when it all started. And I feel like a lot of us during COVID all picked up a little something. But for me, I was just kind of journaling more. I wanted to get better at it, get back into it. I'd done it a little bit in college with a small blog, but nothing crazy. And so I thought, oh, maybe this would just be a blog coming back to life. But then I just sat with it a little bit and I felt like God was telling me to just like be patient, take your time, and literally like surrender this project over to Him. And so then it became more long form, so a book. And I was inspired by the fact that I really struggle to let go of things in my life and let go of control of my life. So by really focusing on surrendering, I was just able to slightly get better at it myself, but then just work on trusting God more through the process of it. While I still struggle with it, it was cool to like take a step back and really find out why maybe I struggle with it so much.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, through the process of writing this book, I mean, I've had the opportunity to kind of get a sneak peek and read a couple of the chapters, and I have loved them. But what do you feel like you have learned about God now that you didn't know before you wrote this book?
That's a really good question. I think of everything, just how patient God is with us. Because I know myself, even though I'm writing on the topic of surrendering my life, I fail time and time again. And so just knowing that He's there to pick us back up, to forgive us again, and we can just trust that every single time is super helpful because I know I get frustrated with like others and myself for just messing up certain things. So it's like knowing that God truly like loves us and cares about us and is patient with us in that way, I think is so critical.
That's really cool. So, one of the chapters that I was reading through, it was the chapter on complacency, and I really, really appreciated that chapter and resonated with that chapter. And you talked a little bit about laziness versus actually relaxing, and I thought that was really cool because that was like a defining line that I really had never thought about before. But there was a chapter in, well, I guess it's not a chapter, it was a passage in the book that I read through it, and I literally read what you said, and I put my phone down because I was like, "Holy cow, this is so good." Can I share that? Or I mean, if you don't want me to share it, I can just be like, "People, pre-order the book. You need to read it." But
No, by all means, please do because I'm very curious, like what that passage means to you. Like that's awesome.
yes. Okay, so at the beginning of the chapter, you were talking about how, you felt like God was telling you to be still, and then you start breaking down what you think being still looks like to you, and so it says, "However, I also see 'be still' to mean something entirely different. Let me explain. Maybe you feel like you're in alignment with God and you're working with Him, praying and speaking to Him daily, and you're doing the work, and yet you're still stressed about the outcome. Maybe you're not really seeing your dreams or your plans come into fruition. Maybe that is the stillness God is referring to. He isn't telling you to lay off the work. Instead, He's saying, 'Hey, I see you working, but are you trusting? Ha- are you having the stillness of heart and mind that I can work all of this out in my way and in my time?'" And I read that phrase and I went, "Whoa, that is so good." How did you get to that place where you go, "Okay, God, being still is truly trusting and letting you take care of the outcome and the circumstances, and I just place this all in your hands?"
Honestly, so during one of the years of writing, I had like I always have a word for the year, but one of the years was stillness. And I just really had to learn to get at peace with not everything coming to fruition in my timeline. And I don't know if I just put very short timelines on myself or what. And I'm not perfect at this by any means yet. Like, I still struggle with it, but it's a faster rebound to where I'm able to understand, okay, God, I might have got a little ahead of myself right there. But in this stillness, I can flip back to the peace that you tell us of like, hey, I got you. This will still all work out, because we can't see it from our earthly perspective. Like it's all in his hand, how he's writing the story. And so, even if we get carried away, it's just that stillness, that reassurance that, hey, it'll still work out. Even if you're doing the work, God will still bless it.
That's so true. So, as I'm hearing you talking about that, one of the things that I was thinking through is like, I feel like there's a component of surrender and stillness that I never thought about before. Because a lot of times when you think about be still, you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna like relax and I'm just gonna chill. But truthfully, being still is a total form of surrender because it's letting go of control and going, okay, God, I trust you no matter what, even when I don't understand what the plan is.
Yeah, a lot of times I get the visualization for myself of like when Jesus commanded the storm to be still, he was in control of everything. So like when he's commanding us to be still, like he still has that control over everything. Is like that's where I go.
That's good. That's really good. So, what do you feel like was the hardest part of writing this book?
Whew. Uh Completing it, honestly, because there's times where we are doing the work, we think, okay, maybe there's something there, and maybe we start comparing or looking around and saying like, "Oh, is this good enough? Like, is this worth it? Would anyone care?" And I think I would get in my head so much of like, "Oh, is this important? Like, should I be doing something else with my life? Is God really telling me to do this?" So I think that's why it took like a full 4 years to come to fruition. But I think at the same time, that was all part of God's plan too, because
Yeah.
you're writing a book on surrender that like it needed
Mhm.
to happen when God said it needed to happen, not when Caitlyn said it
Right.
needed to happen.
Ooh,
So
that's
I
great.
think just learning to surrender, honestly, is still just the hardest part of it all.
It's so funny how God makes us live out exactly what we were writing about.
Oh, yeah. I heard Jenny Allen, I think, mention it once, like, "Okay, if you're struggling with something, just write a book about it because God will help you struggle with it some more," or something like that.
That is so true. That is so true. Um, what do you hope that people take away from reading this book?
I'm hoping they can see themselves in a certain story or a certain passage and just be like, "Okay, if someone else is feeling that way too, like, that's okay." Like, there's, community in that, that someone out there like, they don't have to be alone. So I'm hoping that as people are reading through, they realize that just because maybe they're thinking a certain way, someone out there probably has also felt that way before.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so you have done a lot. Like you're currently like you're a business coach, you're an entrepreneur, you're a podcast host. How did you manage all of your time to like do all the things and like balance it all? Cuz I need this the advice for myself.
Honestly, not to toot my own horn by any means, but I really thrive with being busy per se. I like a full schedule. I like to like time block and all that jazz. So for me, it was just being intentional with the time that I have. I don't have any more time than anyone else. And so I got really clear on what my priorities were. And again, this took me 4 years to complete. So it wasn't an overnight thing, so it was just being really diligent, with my schedule so that, sure, some things became a priority in certain seasons of life, and maybe this book fell down a little bit. But I think we can all go and do a lot of things. We just have to know what maybe our top 3 or 4 priorities are, and those might fluctuate within seasons of life. So I just got really intentional with my whys and what, I wanted my outcome to be, and then it just got, um, not easy, but it got more clear on where I should be giving my time.
That's so good. So I know your podcast is called The Intentional Podcast. Did that like talking about different intentional things every week when y'all release an episode, did that play a role in helping you accomplish this?
I think so. I think it definitely, helped me realize more of my why deep down when, like, creating things and going just through my life, because I have, like, a chemistry background. Like, I'm very, like, analytical, math, science brained and was always kinda told, like, "You're not very creative." So, I think in being able to start a business and then start a podcast and now write this book, it was just not being so, put in a box by others and just realizing that if you set your mind to it, it comes out. And I think with being recording episodes weekly on the podcast and just working that muscle more, it just helped things.
Wow. I just see like I don't know if you've seen this yet, but I think it's really cool how in all of these things, God was just weaving surrender into your story as you're like putting this book together of like, not necessarily starting out in chemistry, but or I mean, you started out in chemistry, but then you didn't stay in chemistry. You jumped into the business world. And like that took a component of surrender. And then starting the podcast, that took another component of surrender. And I just think it's really cool how it's just been a story that he has been weaving for a really long time. And I think that's what makes it even more impactful because, you've lived it and you've walked through it and you've navigated it.
Yeah, I would have to agree. It's definitely a God thing because I could not write my story this way by any means. And just who I have become through the process is also God because there's the who I am today would not believe who I was 4 years ago. That's for sure.
That's such a like, what a cool God story. That's incredible. I love that. Um,
He's a
yes. So what advice would you give to someone who maybe they want to be an author, they want to be an entrepreneur, what encouragement or advice would you give to them?
I would say just start small. It doesn't have to be 0 to 100 right away. I got caught up in that for the longest time, and it's just do the next thing and then do the next thing. So whether you say you wanna be an author, just start journaling, start putting some notes in Google Docs or in your phone notes. Like, it doesn't have to be you have 40,000 words, in a manuscript overnight. Just start small, and I think God will start opening up doors, and even if you think he closes some, sometimes you just have to knock a couple more times.
That's good. That's really good. So what would be a piece of advice that you would give someone who feels like they are struggling in the surrender component of what God is calling them to do?
Pray a lot, um, but I would say just start focusing on who God says he is versus who we want God to be. Because I know I
Mm.
put God in a box for a lot of my time in growing my relationship with him because I wanted my life to go a certain way. And once I started realizing who God says he is, it really shifted my perspective as far as the surrendering component goes.
Oh, that's good. It that kind of reminded me of a story. There I've had a kind of a thought that has been running in the back of my mind this past week, and it was a story from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was, like, super allergic to peanuts, and I still am allergic to peanuts, but I'm not deathly allergic anymore, and I remember we were at an amusement park, and my dad had got a pack of, like, M&Ms out of a vending machine, and he pulled the M&Ms out, and I was like, "Hey, Dad, can I have some M&Ms?" And he looked and he read the back of the package, and it said, "May contain peanuts." And at that time, I couldn't even eat anything that said "may contain peanuts" because I was that allergic. And he said, "I'm sorry, Katie, I can't give you these because there are like, they could have peanuts in them. And, if you eat it, then it could kill you." And as a kid, you're like, "Oh, Dad, I just wanted the M&Ms." And but then as an adult, I look back of that and I was like, "Man, what a good dad to protect me from what I couldn't see because I didn't understand as a child." And I think about that with God a lot of times because a lot of times God may say no, or he may say not right now. And when we hear that, we automatically think, "Ah, well, God, you're just not a good God because you won't give me what I want." And it's like, no, that's not the case. Like, God may actually be protecting you from something that could be very dangerous or very harmful to you in your life. And because we're not God and we're not all knowing and we can't see the future, we just may not have the vision to understand that now. And so, anyways, what you said, it just kind of resonated with that. And it reminded me of like, God is really good. And sometimes surrender is hard because we're not getting what we want when we want it. But like you said, it is that molding process that he's leading us through that I think ultimately is what he wants for us, is to be more like him rather than trying to chase our own selfish ambition.
Yeah, your story, I actually use an analogy in the book where your story made me think of it because basically it's Jesus holding a large teddy bear behind his back and the girl's just death grip on a small teddy bear. And it's just like we sometimes really struggle to let go of what we have in our life for fear that God's not going to provide something better. And it's so true. Like just like your dad was protecting you, it's like our heavenly Father also protects us.
I love that. Um, so where can our listeners find you? What are your socials? What's your podcast? How can they stay connected with you, Caitlin?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram, so it's just at Caitlyn Mentzel, and our podcast is the Intentional Podcast. So we're also on Instagram at the underscore Intentional Podcast, and also have Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you want to connect. I'm happy to do that.
Love it. And then where can we find your book?
So I'm going to be on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. So whatever your reading preference, you can find me there.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to link this in the show description so people can find it super easily. Is there anything else you want to add before we close out tonight?
No, I appreciate the time and I just love our conversation. So
Me
thanks for
too.
having me.
Absolutely. It's always a blast to get to talk to you. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I cannot wait for your book to come out and for people to read it. I think it's going to just be so impactful on so many people's lives. And so I'm really excited and I'm really proud of you. So thanks, friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We can't wait for you to join us next time. If you will, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on a single episode. Also, if you would leave us a review, that would be so helpful in helping more people find and discover this podcast. Once again, thanks for listening to the Alabaster Project.